Well, good afternoon, everyone. As an atmosphere of hushed anticipation descends over the room, I shall begin. And I do hope those of us joining online can hear me. I don't know whether they want to give us a thumbs up or whether that's possible, but I hope that our friends and family joining online today are able to hear everything. I would particularly like to thank you all for coming in person, but I've also got some names to check of Amina's friends and family who are here today. So a very warm welcome to everyone. I'd particularly also like to thank Peter, Amina's husband, her daughters Layla and Maliha for joining us in person. Amina's father, Dr. Amina Yaqin, and his wife Navida, Amina's mother, for joining, and indeed her nephew Rayhan. And everyone is very welcome. It's a lovely synchronous activity across the miles. So we wish you were here in person on this great occasion. My name is Helen Berry, and as Deputy Pro-Vice-Chancellor for the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, it's my great pleasure to introduce our inaugural lecture this evening and to share with you the biography of our distinguished colleague and speaker whose achievements we are celebrating, Professor Amina Yaqin. Amina grew up in Lahore and completed her first degree at Qandeel College for Women in English and Statistics. She came to the UK to do her BA in English at the University of Sussex and ended up with a PhD on Urdu literature, a contrast, she said, that would surprise many who wondered why I, quote, needed to go there to do what was here. Her internships as a student in Pakistan were spread across journalism, teaching in schools, and volunteering for NGOs. In the UK, she had opportunities to work in theatre, with charities and as a translator. Amina's intellectual journey as a scholar continued at SOAS, where she completed her PhD on the intertextuality of women in Urdu literature. Here she started work as a lecturer in 2000 on a fixed-term contract and worked her way up the system. In her first job interview, she says she was asked how long she intended to work on women. It was an interesting question, but the answer 22 years later is that she is still working on women. In fact, over the last 22 years, her interdisciplinary publications have shaped critical debate across 5 overlapping fields, which is tremendous. Gender, questions of agency for women across social divides, post-colonial theory, Muslim studies, and Urdu literary culture. Her most recent monograph, Gender, Sexuality and Feminism in Pakistani Urdu Writing, 2022, plots a genealogy of gender and secular sacred politics in Urdu literary culture and the legend of Urdu feminists, the legacy of Urdu feminist poetics in the 20th century. The book has garnered positive reviews and been noted for its textured discussion of female sexuality in Urdu poetry, the legacy of post-colonial politics in Pakistan, a significant contribution to both literary scholarship and feminist discourse, and a great asset to any student or scholar of humanities and social sciences working in the realm of South Asian studies. The book was launched at the British Library with book talks taking place in the US, at UVA, Cornell, American University, Bard College and New York University, the Pakistan Literature Festival in London, LUMS, FCCU and Qandeel College in Pakistan. It was featured at the pop-up shop of Science and Culture in Exeter and at the local radio station on International Women's Day in 2023. Beyond academic audiences, Amina has used her book as an opportunity to develop a community project at the British Library in collaboration with Camden Council, engaging women in the local area with writings in the Urdu collection, focusing on the theme of Urdu poetry, women, and well-being. If we rewind to the early 2000s for a little while, after 9/11, Professor Yaqin was commissioned to write a piece on Afghan women by the Commission for Racial Equality, or CRE, subsequently the Equality and Human Rights Commission. At the time, she says, the feature felt a bit tokenistic, and after several conversations, it turned into a piece on Muslims in the media ghetto. This article eventually led to a journal article with the intriguing title, Islamic Barbie, The Politics of Gender and Performativity. Both pieces were founding cornerstones for several research interventions, such as the AHRC-funded Framing Muslims Research Network, the co-authored book with Peter Morey, Framing Muslims, Stereotyping and Representation After 9/11, printed in 2011, a co-edited publication that drew attention to the absent presence of Muslim writing in post-colonial studies, Culture, Diaspora and Modernity in Muslim Writing, and a special issue on Muslims in the Frame followed for interventions that explored trans-historical and international perspectives on the stereotyping of Muslims. Framing Muslims is a field-defining interdisciplinary study that explores the conceptual idea of framing and representation through the racial stereotyping and self-stereotyping of Muslims in media narratives in North America and the UK. The book was nominated for the Grawemeyer Awards and received reviews in the media and across disciplines, for example, in the Times Higher Education Supplement, Dawn, Frontline, Saudi Gazette, Journal of American Studies, and Perspectives on Politics. The findings of Framing Muslims informed Engage, now Mend, a not-for-profit company's national touring exhibition, Media Portrayals of Islam and Muslims at the House of Commons, community events at mosques, museums, universities, and conferences. It has also informed the thinking of those within the media involved in debates and discussions surrounding the representation of Muslims. BBC broadcaster Samira Ahmed has noted how she brought up the book in discussion with producers and guests on BBC One, Radio 3, and the World Service. In 2010, the British Library included the website from this project in its web archive, preserving the material for future use. This project informed interventions on multiculturalism and Islamophobia in the form of 2 co-edited books as part of the Muslims, Trust and Cultural Dialogue project. The project was praised by Akbar Ahmad in the Daily Times for its compassionate vision and leadership in this time of division and deepening mistrust between faiths and cultures. The Times Higher Education Supplement in 2016 described the project at the cutting edge of post-colonial studies, shaped across 3 strands: politics, culture, and business and finance. It led to several collaborative publications, including Muslims, Trust and Multiculturalism, New Directions and Contesting Islamophobia, Anti-Muslim Prejudice in Media, Culture and Politics. Project collaborations on a critique of Prevent have been aired at the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Building on this work, Amina currently is co-investigator on an AHRC UKRI funded interdisciplinary project, Empathy, Narrative and Cultural Values, engaging with how South Asian communities experience health and education in the West Midlands region. This project includes formal partnerships with Joseph Chamberlain Sixth Form College, Green Lane Masjid, the British Islamic Medical Association, and Narrative 4, and informal collaborations with Macmillan Cancer Research and the National Literacy Trust. Amina joined the University of Exeter in 2021, which is an interesting time to join us, I must say. She says, quote, "I had my citizenship ceremony in Oldway Mansion in Paynton and got married there as well. I've been coming and going to Devon for a long time to visit my family here, so working at Exeter is a homecoming of sorts." Since arriving here, Amina has taken on the role of co-founding co-editor of Critical Pakistan Studies, an international peer-reviewed journal published by Cambridge University in Press in partnership with the American Institute of Pakistan Studies and the Centre for South Asian Studies, France. Their first issue came out this year. She's also co-founding co-editor of the book series Global Textualities, Multicultural and Transcultural Narratives, published by Manchester University Press. She's published widely in interdisciplinary peer-reviewed journals in the field of English literary studies and has published chapters and articles on Salman Rushdie, Anita Desai, Camilla Shamsi, and Nadeem Aslam. She's currently working on a new book on the politics of culture in Pakistan. I'm struck by how many times I hear Amina's voice when I switch on the radio. Her public engagement work includes commentary and interviews with the BBC, Sky News, Euronews, France 24, TRT World, Voice of Islam, Indus News, Pakistan Television Network, and many others. She's written for the National UAE, the Times Higher Education UK, the Daily Pioneer, the British Film Institute, and The Conversation, and participated in international literary festivals. She's also delivered training sessions for the United Nations Environment Programme and the UK Civil Service. Amina, for very many years and across a number of institutions, has worked closely with leadership teams across education, research, alumni and wellbeing, and with student representatives on equality, diversity and inclusion. I would personally like to pay tribute to the energy and dedication she has shown unfailingly to building a more inclusive culture. Thank you in particular for your work area, Amina. At Exeter, she has led a targeted action plan for the College of Humanities as anti-racism coordinator and actively contributed to the Race Equality Charter Mark application. She has helped to shape formative discussions on the HAST Faculty Wellbeing, Inclusion and Culture Committee and is department lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. As Director of Research in the Societies and Cultures Institute, she's worked as part of a dynamic team fostering research environment in HAST, building networks across our 3 faculties and helping to nurture grant applications, improve peer review and enhance our global profile through our visiting speaker series. And so as a valued colleague and friend, and in celebration of her distinguished scholarly and professional achievements, it is my great pleasure now to hand over to Professor Amina Yaqin. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, for the generous introduction and the very warm welcome. And let me start by expressing my gratitude and thanks to everyone who has made their way across here today and to those of you who are joining online from different time zones, and a special hello to my family in Pakistan. There are so many people to thank in this intellectual journey to a personal chair in English. I'm indebted to my colleagues in the department for welcoming me with such warmth and enthusiasm. My head of department is there, Rika. Exeter, South Asia, the Societies and Cultures Institute, as well as colleagues and PS staff across HAS and the wider community. And I'm, I can see sort of friends here as well who've traveled far and wide. So thank you so much for coming. It means a lot. Over the years, I have been inspired by the work of Professors Donna Landry in the audience at the back, Geeta Patel, Rena Lewis, Nasser Mir, and others who have helped me to believe in the interdisciplinary trajectory of my work. Reading Edward Said, Guthrie Spivak, and Homi Bhabha introduced me to post-colonial theory, and my time at SOAS and Sussex has helped to cement that journey. Now, most of you don't know this, but I was lucky enough to be a student in Homi Bhabha's seminar group at Sussex, and his teaching of Fanon has remained with me across the years. And there's something quite sort of interesting about learning that work in Sussex and teaching that here in Exeter as well. Peter Morey, of course, has been an intellectual and life companion with whom I've enjoyed pushing the boundaries of disciplinary silos and who's part of most and a lot of the work that I've been doing on Muslim representation. It's also wonderful to have my 2 daughters here, Maliha and Layla, and they're looking very embarrassed, so I won't say much more. And there are members of the family who can't be here in person, my parents, brothers, extended family in Pakistan, my sister in Germany, and my in-laws. I'd also like to take a moment to remember my mother-in-law who passed away some time ago. My father has always been there to support me, so it's sad not to have him here today, although if he was here, he'd be asking me to turn the volume up as he refuses to wear his hearing aids. So Abu, if you're listening, turn the volume up. The story of women's education in my family is an interesting one, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the oral tales of my grandmothers, who ignited a passion for poetry, women's voices, and lost stories. I'd like to dedicate the lecture to them and to a dear friend, Nuzhat Kazmi, who sadly passed away earlier this year. We shared the pleasure of Urdu conversations, and she looked after my children when I wasn't there. Thank you, Nuzhat. So as Helen mentioned, I grew up in Lahore and spent my formative years in Pakistan. The decade of the 1980s left a lasting impression as we went through our college years at a time when the women's movement, transnational activism, ideas of feminism and resistance offered a different narrative to the one we read about in our Pakistan studies textbooks. Our English literature curriculum at college familiarized us with the canon, and Shakespeare, who has been with us from school, was joined by Milton, George Eliot, and others. English literary narratives worked well in a climate of censorship and authoritarianism, where Urdu was under constant surveillance. We sang hymns for college assembly and performed nativity plays at Christmas. We did more English in our missionary school and college environment than we did local languages. And I knew far more about English literature than I did Urdu literature. My father was always torn by this Anglicization and arranged Urdu tutoring for us. I took up Persian at college and it brought me closer to Saadi, Rumi, and Hafiz. Despite these aspirations, my grandmother was quick to point out that we were Anglophiles who thought we knew better, with a chip on our shoulders because we were educated. Urdu and Punjabi poetry was around us, constantly at home and outside. Iqbal, Faiz, Bulleh Shah, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, Qawwali and Sufiana Kalam coexisted with pop culture. I was a voracious reader, but not a terribly discerning one, and my shelves were lined with classics, popular romances, comic books, and I loved theatre and performance. So when the opportunity presented itself to do an English literature degree in England, I leapt at it. At Sussex, I was attracted to a joint honours in English literature and development studies. At Connect College before, I had combined English with statistics, so this was kind of felt familiar in terms of different types of subjects coming together, but also different. And I had interesting and passionate discussions with friends in development studies, a few of whom were of the opinion that I was wasting my time in the first world and should be out there fixing third world problems where I came from. It was an interesting dynamic. I pretty quickly decided that the kind of engagement, not because of my friends, who were all very kind, the kind of engagement required from development studies was one that I was uncomfortable with. So I moved on to cultural difference and conflict. And that has defined the path that I've taken over the years from English to comparative and then post-colonial literature at SOAS. Over all those years, teachers, friends, colleagues, speakers, students, many of you are sitting here, have made me who I am. There are too many names to mention, and I feel incredibly lucky and privileged to have had the ear and guiding voice of so many. And I have to single out my dear friend Kai Easton from my SOAS days, who's kind of here in the audience as well. Now, having sort of set that up, I'd like to move on to the topic for today, which indicates past influences and future directions for my work. And I have to warn you, there are not a lot of jokes in this because I was sort of like, I know that I have to do jokes in a lecture, but I've not succeeded. So anyway, so please bear with me. So before I begin, I'd like to share with you the beginning of a well-known poem, Shikwa, by the poet-philosopher Muhammad Iqbal, as it prefaces the topic of controversy, which runs throughout this paper. And it's also a reminder of my grandmother, who used to recite his poetry when we were growing up. It was written in the early 20th century. Kyun ziyankar banu sood faramosh rahun, fikre fardana karun mehve ghame dosh rahun. नाले बुलबुल के सुनूं और हमातन गोश रहूं हम नवा मैं भी कोई गुल हूं के खामोश रहूं जुर्रत आमोज मेरी ताबे सुखन है मुझको शिकवा अल्लाह से खाकम बदन है मुझको Why should I remain a bearer of loss and sacrifice my profit, contemplate sorrows of the past instead of looking forward? Why should I drown in the lament of the nightingale? Dear friend, I'm not a rose who will stay quiet. My ability to write verse gives me the strength to speak out. With dust in my mouth, I make my complaint to God. There's a lot I could say about this, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to jump straight from there to something of an anecdote in terms of that point I made about controversy. And this is about television and the work that I do with regards to public engagement, something that I think is very important as an academic, but also something that often throws up some very interesting scenarios. So I'd like to begin by sharing an anecdote about a morning show television interview that I was invited to do last year in Pakistan to discuss my book, Gender, Sexuality and Feminism. I had thought it would be a straightforward process where the anchor would ask me key questions the book responds to, but the experience was quite different. We had a longish exchange over WhatsApp, and I've kind of got some of this over there about the format of the 20-minute discussion. I was invited to submit the questions. I sent a list of 10. I think 3 didn't kind of sit too well with them. One was, why do we need to talk about feminism and women's writing today? Another was poetry, politics and women, from Hudud ordinances to the Aurat March. And 3, what is Urdu poetry's relationship to dance? But, you know, in the kind of I didn't get a direct response, but I was informed that we would discuss ek achhi society banane mein aurat ka kirdar, a woman's role in making a good society. I was a bit sort of in nonplussed, so I thought I should check what they meant by a good society, to which I didn't get an answer. The researcher chose to forward the producer's instructions to, quote, be mindful of the fact that we don't need any sort of controversy and to keep the conversation culture and religion appropriate. So I was firmly put in my place. At this point, I reminded them of the title of my book to see if they were sure this would be a permissible topic for the show. In response, I was told the discussion would be on a general topic. And at this point, I was kind of thinking, is there any point to doing this interview? I was given a concession that we could talk about women education, responding to one of the questions I had sent. On the day of the interview, I was ushered in much later than planned to the show. This 25 minutes I could see was just kind of going down and down and down. I could see on the screen outside that there was a discussion on acne and pimples with a skin doctor before my interview. And this went on for 20 to 30 minutes. My segment kind of was reduced to 5 minutes. The host, a young woman, was apologetic and more or less admitted that she had no agency to change the narrative despite her enthusiasm for the topic. We just do what we're told. We managed to have a conversation which was interesting, but it was a pretty telling insight into how agenda setting takes place in the media industry. And this isn't the first time I've had a run-in with the media, and I've got lots of other anecdotes, but I'm not going to bore you with those right now. This occasion was a reminder of why feminism is treated as a polarizing topic in the public sphere and shut down before it can be debated. And so we find activists, academics, and trolls taking to the social media sphere and becoming entrenched in volatile oppositional politics. And this anecdote helps me to set up today's topic of feminism and the crossroads and the 2 examples of Malala Yousafzai and Qandeel Baloch. But first, let me just set up some of the key parameters for my critique. So in order to contextualize my argument against the broader context of women's rights, freedom and emancipation, it is useful to revisit the tensions between the ideological Islamic Republic and the women's rights movement, which dates back to pre-independence and partition. Post-partition Islamic ideology has been routinely used by religious parties and the state to control moral behavior, sexualities, and the family, with particular emphasis on women's role within it. Since the 1980s, feminist activists have been navigating the narrative of women's agency through participatory action. This has included protest marches, legal and human rights representations, and arts and culture-led initiatives across the performing arts. And in sort of also faith-based feminism has gained agency through Indigenous empowerment narratives. And there's been sort of an interesting link between feminism and development funding and NGOization as part of a co-opted and polarized discourse. So it's there's quite a lot, but I'm not going to overwhelm you with too much there, and just sort of leave it at that and pick up some of the point that I want to take you to, which is the Aurat March. In Pakistan, the post-liberalization feminism phase has really come to fore in what I would call as the third wave on Pakistan, if we want to apply the kind of waves analogy to feminism in Pakistan. So I'm skipping over the first and the second, taking you straight into the third. And the post-liberalization feminism phase has really come to fore in the third wave, reflected in the Aurat March since 2018, demanding gender justice and mobilizing linked activism across the nation through protest marches on International Women's Day. Activists emphasize women's right to choose, an end to workplace discrimination, and zero tolerance towards sexual harassment. Multiple agencies are disseminated through new digital technologies and public art to spread awareness. The Aurat March, closely linked to the global Me Too movement with its borrowed original slogan, Mera Jism Meri Marzi, my body, my choice, absorbs global symmetries, highlighting street harassment for women, safe spaces for women workers, and a broader agenda of inclusion. This is complemented by the use of visual placards during marches in city locations across the country and a networked social media presence. At the macro level, we see a return to the protest culture of the 1980s and women's marches, while at the micro level, the battlefronts have increased through digitization, mediatization, and a hybrid military-civilian role. The 1980s movement was galvanized by a critical response to the introduction of Sharia-led Hudud ordinances, while the recent march is motivated by a democratized redress of global inequalities and a suspicion of the NGO model, a model, as I said, which includes faith-based charitable development organizations as well. Both groups have been respectively targeted as Western imports marked by elite sensibilities, whether it's Western imports as diaspora-led initiatives or Western imports that are directly through development organizations. So in this model of post-liberalization feminism, personalized, transformative, and creative acts have come into conflict with governing forces. For instance, vitriolic clashes have taken place over the Aurat March's creative messaging on placards in Urdu and English, attempting to reshape the conduct of individuals and groups. And the linguistic coding on the placards has become a site of cultural disagreement over the inappropriate use of language in an Islamic society. At governance level, the right for women to protest in the Aurat March has triggered court orders and first information reports against the organizers and death threats and so on. Consequently, a national moral panic has attached itself to the translated phrases and hybrid Urdu-English messaging in women's march posters, such as "Khana khud garam kar lo," warm up your own food, "My body, my choice," and "Dick pics apne paas rakho," keep your dick pics to yourself, across different media forms, justifying the need to control and protect women from external influences. Now, to translate the offense caused by the Urdu placards, it is instructive to consider the history and legacy of gendered narratives in the 20th century. This story can be traced through linguistic hybridities, rekhti and reform, anti-colonial resistance, and the longer trajectory of Islamic and Indic aesthetic influences, as well as colonial attitudes towards sexuality. The details of the story can be found in my first book, so you're not going to get that again, but you can certainly go and read it if you're interested. I'm interested in exploring how Pakistani feminism gets mythologized as a singular idea and gets framed in television drama, reality TV, social media channels, and live interview formats. In my research on contemporary women's writing from Pakistani in Urdu and English, I've encountered a variety of autobiographical projects that self-consciously challenge stereotypical notions of women, countering the grand narrative of a nationalist discourse that often ties itself closely to an orthodox Islamic representation. These literary narratives underscore a feminist subjectivity that comes out of a historical connectivity with radicalism and affiliations to the left, the progressive writers' movement being a case in point. Now, adopting the genre of autobiography, modern Urdu women writers, such as Ismat Chughtai, narrated a changing personal identification from a 19th century Sharif culture of female seclusion to a gradual 20th century appropriation of public sphere, discarding the veil and seclusion. On the other hand, a national leader and the first woman prime minister in Pakistan and in the Muslim world, Benazir Bhutto donned the veil to lead the nation, as she elaborates in her autobiography. Autobiographies by female politicians such as Shaista Ikramullah's From Barda to Parliament, Benazir Bhutto's Daughter of the East, and Tehmina Durrani's My Feudal Lord portray a narrative of public life and do not seek to venture away from society's normative ideas of selfhood, although they clearly challenge stereotypical notions of women's identity in a Muslim state. The literary studies scholar Lee Gilmore argues when a writer is seen in relation to the dominant discourses of power, she was simultaneously inscribing and resisting the innocence of autobiography as a naive attempt to tell a universal truth, is radically particularized by a specific culture's notion of what that truth is, who may tell it, and who is authorized to judge it. In a country such as Pakistan, where the foundational story of the nation has been told through state channels and Pakistan studies textbooks, these and other women's memoirs offer a point of departure. Speaking of the nation, they are privatized, marketed as confessional narratives. However, these women's connectivity to politics and its discursive positions of power may be seen as a disclaimer of their neutrality as subjects. What is to be noted here is that all the above-mentioned memoirs by prominent Pakistani women written in English have been internationally published and may often be picked up as testimonials, offering a glimpse into the real lives of women in Pakistan by Western readers. They help to reconfirm the idea of irreconcilable differences between a religious and secular framework, and they exploit the exaggerated representation in the West of discrimination against women in Pakistan. I'm interested in building in this work on life writing and Muslim women's lives to consider how we attribute a voice to a particular story in a social media age. Whose story is it? Who is telling it? And with what agency? And here I'm sort of going to return to Lee Gilmore, whose book, The #MeToo Effect, where she speaks of the, quote, narrative power of Twitter, now X, and how the collective sharing of stories through its hashtag acts as a, quote, narrative device. She argues that this method of a shared participatory narrative activism of individual accounts that can be assembled into collective storytelling opens up an alternative form of testimonial justice. And what I want to do is kind of try and work out how this narrative power has affected exceptional role models such as Malala Yousafzai and self-made celebrities such as Qandeel Baloch. At this point, let me turn to the education narratives of Malala Yousafzai, who's become an icon for girlhood in Pakistan for the West and beyond Pakistan as well, of course. Before she became a global brand, Malala Yousafzai was a blogger for BBC Urdu under the pseudonym Gul Mackay, providing an insider's account of the Taliban takeover of the Swat Valley in 2009 and their intolerant stance against women's education, targeting the destruction of schools as part of their strategy for control. She started blogging as an 11-year-old from January to March 2009, sharing her experiences as an eyewitness. Eventually, she and her family fled the valley. During this period, Malala received honors and international recognition for her advocacy. And there was a conscious choice made in sort of going from that anonymity of the blogger to a more recognized face on media. She returned with her family to Sawat in 2012 and in October was shot in the head by a Taliban gunman on her way to school in a bus with others. And subsequently, she was taken to Birmingham, where she was treated and is recovered and lives there. So I'm going to jump to her jointly written memoir with Christina Lamb, I Am Malala, as an example of white saviorism. Supported by her left-leaning father, a liberal West, and a Nobel Peace Prize, her trauma has been transformed into inspiration for girls' education on a global stage, encouraging women to take up the pen from Nigeria to Pakistan. She's an Oxford graduate, and there's a really interesting story about her being an Oxford graduate. I actually knew she was going to be an Oxford graduate about 6 years before she became an Oxford graduate, because I was at a dinner and in the reception, catch hold of me and I'll tell you the anecdote about that one, where this was decided. And therefore, a lot of what happens in Malala's life is predetermined before she actually knows about it herself. So she is an Oxford graduate, the youngest Nobel laureate, co-founder of the Malala Fund with her father, and now a film producer under the banner of Extracurricular. Her exceptionalism has been necessary to sustain the narrative of global development and liberal intervention. She has in the past expressed a desire to be the PM of Pakistan, in addition to being going back to the book she published in 2013 and her sort of Nobel Peace Prize, which she won jointly with Kailash Satyarthi of India for her activism on behalf of children. What we see subsequently is an attempt to reclaim her narrative. She talks about this in the speech that she, after her Nobel Prize speech, she says, "I received messages of support from all over the world, but there was mostly silence from my own country, except that on Twitter and Facebook, we could see my own Pakistani brothers and sisters turning against me. They accused me of speaking out of a teen lust for fame. One said, forget the image of your country, forget about the school. She would eventually get what she was after, a life of luxury abroad." Malala's subjectivity has been, to a large extent, been shaped by assumptions from the dominant culture that she is a part of. In 2018, she declared her intent to return to Pakistan after completing her education. And of course, this sort of encouraged the press in the UK to ask her about the anti-Malala Day in private schools in Pakistan, which dates back to the publication of her memoir. And to which she simply said, "I just don't know anything I've said that makes me anti-Pakistan or anti-Islam." The question remains whether her voice can be dissociated from all associations to represent an authentic persona, if indeed an authentic persona can exist. We can see an interesting example of this in her interview with Emma Watson and their dialogue about feminism, in which Watson says that she decided to take the question on feminism out of her interview with Malala, whereas Malala chooses to bring it up in the conversation herself. So so there's sort of different ways in which Malala is kind of picking up her narrative and trying to rewrite it. The difficulty is that she's got these really, I Am Malala is a major book, and which she co-wrote with Christina Lamb, who is an award-winning successful journalist, a leading foreign correspondent, and has books like Waiting for Allah, The Girl from Aleppo, and then a new version of I Am Malala How One Girl Stood Up for Education Changed the World was published in 2015 and was co-authored with the American journalist and fiction writer for young adults, Patricia McCormick, targeting young readers. And I remember having this conversation with my girls when they would get this as recommended reading at the school. And I said, I have the book. And they said, no, you don't have the book. I said, but I have the book. And they said, you have the wrong one. We have the right one. So anyway, the subtitle, so this was the Patricia McCormick book that they had. The subtitle was notably different from the first book, which simply said, The Girl Who Stood Up for Education and Was Shot by the Taliban. Malala then published another book entitled We Are Displaced, co-authored with Liz Welch, published in 2019. Divided into two parts, the book gives us Malala's story as I Am Displaced, followed by short stories by refugee girls from around the world. We Are Displaced. Liz Welch is an award-winning journalist, a memoirist, and a contributing writer at various magazines. Her work has appeared in New York Times, Oprah Magazine, etc. So what we see is that through this rewriting and reframing of an exceptional life, and she remains an advocate of global universal rights. And this puts her in the picture with models of neoliberalism that contribute to precarity, poverty, and gender-based violence in the global South. Malala Yousafzai can never get her girlhood back, but she is in the business of rewriting her narrative through her carefully controlled and no doubt managed social media presence. When it comes to life writing and the idea of testimonial justice, Yousafzai is still stuck in the white savior narrative. And from there, I want to move on to my next example. In contrast to the carefully orchestrated public persona reflected through Malala Yousafzai's managed accounts is Qandeel Baloch's equally unconventional personal projection of a cheeky, sexually provocative and child-free image. So ahead of her time, Baloch literally translated My Body, My Choice on social media through her videos and became a victim, sadly, of an honor killing. In interviews, Baloch emphasized her authenticity and moral sincerity as part of her unique brand. She utilized the English language to showcase her upward mobility and kept in touch with Urdu to reach mass audiences. Her journey to public recognition was set in motion by participation in the Pakistani version of Pop Idol. Although her audition was unsuccessful, her clip got 8.3 million hits on YouTube. And she did lots of things. She set up camp outside Imran Khan's house as a suitor after he got divorced. And in the same year, her video "How I'm Looking" went viral, and she's just kind of one of the most searched people on Google at the time. Baloch was not taken seriously by feminist groups prior to her death, and there was no counter-narrative on Twitter other than Qandeel Baloch funny interview, which confirmed a general discomfort with her. Interestingly, Baloch in one of her later tweets self-identified as a feminist. And there's a kind of fairly long quote, which I'll just read a little bit of. It says, "As a woman, we must stand up for justice. I believe that I am a modern-day feminist. I believe in equality. And it sort of goes on, I'm just a woman with free thoughts, free mindset, and I love the way I am." And what we see here is what has been referred to as her DIY, skillful use of social media as an alternative space for political expression and protest against mainstream gendered behaviors. It is also social media that generated complaints against her through the regulatory media body. According to Matt Ratto and Megan Bowler, social media enables DIY citizens to organize and protest in new ways and to repurpose corporate content in order to offer political counter-narratives. Baloch recognized feminism as a brand, and as someone constantly branding herself, she saw economic value in it. But she knew that without some kind of connection in the industry, she couldn't really become a mainstream celebrity. She was born in Dera Ghazi Khan, a city in southern Punjab with historic connections to Baloch chieftains and Langa sultans from Multan. From a low-income family, she propelled herself from a reality TV show to a social media celebrity, independently of her family and under a pseudonym. She saw Karachi as a city of opportunity that gave her the anonymity she needed to pursue her dream. While critics have focused on the intersectionality of gender and class in the context of honor crime as a dominant frame which drowns out all the other narratives, it is Karachi's cruel optimism, quote, and the promise of a good life that traps Baloch in a vicious cycle of aspiration. What we see in Baloch's story are multiple layers of unbridgeability across class, ethnicity, and gender. Now, Baloch's appearance on a live television debate with the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which is Imran Khan's party, state-sanctioned cleric Mufti Abdul Qavi was a turning point. Qavi met with Baloch a year later in Karachi, and she shared pictures and a video of their meeting in a hotel room. And she used this kind of to capture this Maulvi in a compromised position. And it led, sadly, to her downfall. He claimed he was offering her religious guidance, whereas she argued he crossed permissible boundaries and was a horrible and inauthentic man, a disgrace to his profession. So Baloch's story went viral and global with the BBC, including it on their website. And in the ensuing controversy in Pakistan, the press revealed her true identity, which proved to be her undoing. She was found dead in her family home 18 days later, murdered by her brother Wasim. A moral panic emerged in the wake of Baloch's tragic honor killing, and the same news media that had helped to fan the flames of controversy around her began to wring their hands over the injustice of her honor killing. And Baloch had, spoken up and said that this Maulvi is a blot on the name of Islam. Who is he to claim to be a guardian of the faith? And it's really quite interesting how the journalist Sanam Meher plots the biography of Qandeel Baloch and rewrites this whole story in that biography, because she puts certain incidents together, because he was never held up or accused or had any comeback on her death. And not that he was, I'm not claiming that he was directly involved, but Meher's placement of this kind of very chilling statement from him, in which he said, I also have a message for those who are watching and listening right now. In the future, before you falsely accuse a man of doing something, for God's sake, think about the consequences. And when a man has been accused, it is a blow to the hearts of all his followers, and their every sigh is an appeal to Allah. And Meher's placement of this statement reinforces his cynical use of Islam to clear his name, while at the same time intimating that Baloch's end was a result of divine retribution. Her narration of the honor crime suggests that an honor code is embedded in both religious and cultural values. Repeatedly, women are told that Islam clashes with modernity, and Qandeel's performativity continually challenged the status quo, and sort of disrupted middle-class spaces and their television screens. Unfortunately, no liberal feminist could save her. So the entertainment channels rely on creating controversy to crank up their ratings in the short term, because this was an interview that was on a channel. And in the long run, they contribute to the reproduction of sites of epistemic violence, where women's voices are decontextualized and trauma is enacted on the bodies of women. This particular channel where this event took place that would then lead to the tragic consequences is a controversial private channel that continues to operate despite numerous notices and fines by the Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority over its status as a news channel. And the regulatory authority has played an interesting structural role in monitoring the representation of women on television, and are called upon to adjudicate when viewers feel offended by what they see. However, its governance model remains vulnerable to bureaucracy, business interests, and censorship-led mediation. Now, in contrast, consider the outpourings of the male media personality, the late televangelist Amina Yaqin and former Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, which is Imran Khan's party again, Minister of Religious Affairs, who rose to fame as the anchor of Alim Online. His show represented religious broadcasting on private satellite networks, popularizing authentic Islamic knowledge. Notably, he was included in a list of 500 influential Muslims worldwide thrice. His checkered profile includes hosting the anti-Ahmadi Khatme Nabuwat group, parading his second wife on morning shows and sort of, talking about the legalities or the illegalities of his various marriages. On the Amir Liaquat YouTube channel, he carefully distanced himself from Aurat marchers, writing off their placards as examples of a Bazari street Urdu language, projecting himself as a more empathetic supporter of authentic women's causes. So it's quite interesting, and I just want to I'm plotting some of the different things here that sort of come together at the end. And there's also been, in this television channel context, and the different kind of personas that are involved and the different people that are interviewed. And so if we look at the ways transnational social activists and journalists are treated, then I'll give you an example of the Marvi Sirmad, for instance, who was humiliated by an acclaimed Urdu scriptwriter and director who calls himself a feminist. The writer took center stage by airing his skepticism, disdain, and rejection of the Aurat March slogan, "My body, my choice," and repeatedly speaking over his fellow panelist. He identified himself as a gatekeeper of Urdu by expressing outrage at what he felt were sexually explicit slogans unsuitable for a linguistic register of polite innuendo and metaphor. When Sirmad interrupted him with the slogan, "My body, my choice," to show her disagreement, he swore at her, called her a bitch and a worthless woman whose body was of no interest to anybody. The full exchange was aired live without any intervention by the channel, and the moderator was left speechless. In this moment, Qamar, who claims to speak for women through his storytelling, separated women's bodies from themselves and negated the narrative testimonies that have emerged under this banner. Qamar was named and shamed by prominent Pakistani women activists, notably the actor Mahira Khan. A staunch supporter of the Aurat March and with a following of over 2 million on Twitter and 11 million on Instagram, she wrote, "I am shocked at what I have just seen and heard, sick to the core. This same man who abused a woman on TV is revered and given project after project," and so on. Hashtag Khalilur Rahman Qamar. Qamar took offense at her comments and has since appeared on numerous television interviews and his kind of television worth has actually increased as an interviewee because of this, claiming his moral high ground of a language, devotion to strong women, and his hatred of the way in which Khan framed him. As a successful screenwriter, he repeatedly underlines the power of his script and how he has boosted Khan's career by casting her as the main lead in his drama. And I'm not so interested in, who he casts and doesn't cast, but the point is he plays a really prominent role in script writing for film and television in Pakistan. He often, as a writer, reiterates his working class background in interviews and continues to spit venom toward Khan as well. He asserts his power as a screenwriter who influences casting decisions and publicly announces who he keeps in his repertoire and who he's thrown out. He remains very popular with audiences, producers, and TV show hosts. He claims he speaks for women's rights, citing his dramas and films as an example. What he chooses not to acknowledge are the ideological linguistic constructions in which he frames his female characters and the plot lines they occupy. However, he exerts power and influence as a gatekeeper of Urdu narratives appropriated by producers and viewed by mass audiences. So when Mahira Khan shamed Qamar on Twitter, she did it as part of a wider participatory response that can be read as testimony and taps into a new narrative form that illustrates how digital technologies are embedded in this kind of third wave, fourth wave feminism. And here I'll kind of go back to Gilmore's argument that can be applied of narrative testimony that can be applied to Khan's use of the hashtag Khalilur Rahman Qamar in her tweet to exercise the narrative power of testimony and share solidarities with a networked online community demanding accountability and retribution for his behavior. Khan's tweet, if read as testimony, helps to restore the credibility of a feminist activist such as Sirmat. So I'll just sort of wrap up now, and this is just in the way of a conclusion. What I want to do is to draw your attention to global headlines about Pakistan that get most coverage other than Imran Khan, of course, who is no stranger to patriarchy and has linked parda and sexual violence. His populist politics relies on reinforcing stereotypical representations of Eastern women as who should be pious and parda observant in contrast to westernized women. So the shadow of shame looms large. Last year saw the international news media coverage of Pakistan's shameful first Miss Universe contestant. And then there are several kind of headlines about why is Pakistan's first Miss Universe facing backlash in her own country, etc. The fashion model at the heart of this controversy was Erica Robin, a contestant from a minority Christian background in Karachi. And she was sort of took great care in terms of like balancing the Islamic credentials as part of the fashion modeling that she did by wearing modest fashion for the burkini swimwear category in the contest to show she was sort of applying religio-cultural sensitivity. Anyway, it did not appease religious scholars, members of the Senate from the right-wing Jamaat-e-Islami Party, journalists accusing the state of sending Pakistani women to participate in beauty pageants, all on social media. It is an interesting moment to behold with the country at the brink of an economic crisis relying on bailouts from the IMF, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Equally interesting to note was Robin's advocacy for women's education and anti-gender bias as part of her activism agenda. At the Miss Universe annual charity gala, she chose to quote from one of our biggest Pakistani icons, Malala Yousafzai, on the power of voice. After her successful venture at the pageant, she was appointed as the official Goodwill Ambassador for Women and Gender Equality by the United Nations Economic and Social Council in collaboration with several other bodies. So it's not insignificant that global agencies identify prominent Pakistani women representatives in the media sphere to address major concerns about women's education and honor crime, as has been the case with Yousafzai and with the Baloch. It's worth noting here that education is recognized by the World Bank as a human right and a powerful driver of development. And findings from the Global Gender Index have noted a downward spiral in Pakistan's gender parity. In this narrative, Yousafzai and Robin are networked into a global feminist neoliberalism that has come to coexist alongside transnational feminist models intersecting and clashing with local belief systems and translocal networks. So post Qandeel Baloch, the Mera Jism Meri Marzi narrative on Twitter or X showcases collective testimonies and protests against sexual violence by activists and vitriolic responses by skeptics and trolls. It can be read as a collective call to action by a networked feminism responded to by an equal and opposite networked misogyny. Social media, with its new audiences and content creators alongside mainstream channels, has led to women-only counter-publics, but the question of access remains, as not every woman in Pakistan owns a smartphone, and the digital divide in urban and rural populations is stark. General Musharraf's Enlightened Moderation Program and developmental empowerment agenda in the noughties, privatizing the media, has led to a greater commodification of religious shows and a proliferation of scholars who are self-made venturing into the celebrity frame. In contrast, some of the gendered content that has emerged in television culture explores honor killings, rape, adultery, the violation of women's divorce rights. etc., alongside the more popular romance genre of desperate housewives and arranged marriages. It raises the question about cultural citizenship and the impact of the feminist movement in the public sphere. However, social media platforms such as WhatsApp are where stories circulate the most and often without filters. State censorship can suspend social media networks on the pretext of national security, and cybersecurity has given the state greater powers of surveillance. Thus, misinformation, state regulation, and a general lack of accountability on global information sharing platforms creates messy and unequal publics and counter-publics. I'd like to sort of end at that point. This is a work in progress, so thank you so much for patiently listening to it.
You're not done.
Oh, no.
Good afternoon or good evening, depending on your preference. I'm Amina Yaqin, I'm head of English and Creative Writing, and it's my great pleasure just to say a few thank yous at the end of this wonderful inaugural lecture that we've just heard. First of all, I would like to let you know that it's tradition at Exeter not to have questions after an inaugural lecture. I think Amina has done a good job. We can have conversations with you about your work over a glass at the reception later on. So we've got that to look forward to. But first, a few thank yous. So first of all, I would like to thank the Faculty of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences who made this event possible. Thank you especially for Helen Berry, who is here today and who gave this wonderfully generous introduction to Amina's talk. I would like to thank especially Ed White Oak, our executive assistant, who has quietly worked in the back and made really everything happen, from the tech, from the reception, from the organization. Thank you very much, Ed. I don't know what we would do without you, really. But thank you very much. I would like to thank Amina's friends, her family and colleagues for joining us today in person and also online. I'm sad that not everybody can be here, but I hope you had a good chance to listen in and enjoy this wonderful opportunity to hear Amina speak about her research. Finally, biggest thank you to Amina for giving us this wonderfully rich introduction to her research on the importance of biography in Pakistani feminism. So it's a wonderful opportunity that you've given us an opportunity to, you've taken us on a journey through your own life, your work, your career today. It's been a huge pleasure, and I can say at the very end, I'm so exceptionally grateful to have you as a colleague here in Exeter every day. You make my life as a head of department easier, as well as in your role as director of WIC, or in Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity. So huge thank you. We are very, very grateful to have you. And everybody here, please just join me in a final big loud applause for Amina before we go and have a drink. Thank you. Are you done?
Am I done?
Would you like to say